6-7 weeks. Some of you, maybe most of you, may be familiar with the work of the great Carlos Villa and may have seen a wonderful retrospective. It's co-curated by Trisha Legasso-Goldberg right here. At the Asian Art Museum in 2022, also had a life at the Arts Commission. Most people think of feathers and capes and a beautiful slinky-like pattern, and that work is completely astonishing. I was tipped off to this very late body of work by an artist whose mom taught at the same school as Carlos's widow, Mary, who's right there. And Mary and her son Rio are keepers of the Carlos Villa estate and the legacy. And I saw a couple images of these things, and then tried to figure out if there were more, how many there were, what sort of condition they were in. A couple of them were shown in the retrospective, and it turned out there was like a full fan body of work of this stuff. And it seems to speak, at first blush, an entirely different language as the rest of the work. But as some of you may know, Carlos grew up here in the Tenderloin in a small Filipino-American community. He was turned on to art by his older cousin, his familial cousin, Leo Baldor, amazing art geometric abstractionist. Went to, checked into the Army, came out on the GI Bill, went to SFAI, and sort of the rest is history. He moved to New York. He was making work in a minimalist mode. And then there's this great, I recommend to all of you, really long, wonderful, thorough oral history with him that was performed by the Archives of American Art. You can find it online in the 90s. And he's talking about how he's in New York and he's hanging out with Dan Flavin, and he's like, at some point I realized it's like only so many conversations you can have about light bulbs. He's like facing really diminishing returns on what he understands as the dominant mode. And you were either in the mode or you were out of the mode. And he's like, maybe there's another mode. So he moves here, he starts making the work for which he's known, he organizes symposia, he's at the forefront of multiculturalism, he's really getting people together. He also begins to think of his artwork as much broader than discrete sort of object-based practice. And in some of his exhibitions, he would put his syllabus on the wall, a frame. Really expanded, super exciting practice. And then, for reasons that are, I hate to say unknown, but sort of speculative, in the last 2 years of his life, he cranks out all this work. And it seems to be made for a show at the Mission Cultural Center in 2011. You can find photographs online of that installation, including most of this work, and then sort of grab bag of other things from across the last 10 years of his life, more or less. And it's been really great to have the show and to not know what the answers are. Because I've been learning from everybody who comes in, who has thoughts and opinions, and many of you knew Carlos, studied with Carlos, love Carlos. So it's just really kind of wonderful to open all this stuff up, and then as bittersweet as it is, to know that it gets closed up again. So it was really special to have you here, and I'm really honored to have Mark Johnson, Jennifer Wilford here with us today. Like I said, Mark co-curated the Carlos retrospective. He knew Carlos and worked really closely, even shared an office with Carlos in the basement of the former SFAI campus. You saw that space. And is worked at San Francisco State and really spearheaded a lot of really important projects, artistic projects. So thanks, Mark, for being here. And Jennifer, yes. Jennifer is an amazing artist who studied with Carlos at SFAI, then went to Berkeley. You can see her work at SF Beaumont right now, just won the Arcadia Award, one of the Bay Area's finest, and was really close with Carlos. So I invited these two fine people to come here and sort of share some reflections about this work, some thoughts about this work in the context of the broader practice or not. And they're both going to speak a little bit, and then we wanted to make room for thoughts and impressions from the group. So feel free to contribute. the time is right. And also, Mark has a little handout here that maybe wants to, maybe I'll hold up on it, whatever, deal. Okay, so Jennifer, I'm gonna take almost like a recording.
I'm just gonna put this down so I'm not moving the phone here. There. Hi guys. Picture, if you will, it's fall 1993, and a young undergraduate has just transferred from community college to the San Francisco Art Institute. It's 9 a.m., which is an ungodly hour for any young undergraduate art student to be out for a class at SFAI. But that class is, of course, Carlos Villa's Worlds in Collision. So this is how I start my career at SFAI. Not long after this, Carlos kind of figures out that I'm extremely curious about whatever this class is about and what he's up to. So I get conscripted into the very strange underground bunker, which some of you know about, which was, I don't know, like, not bigger than this space, I want to say, right, Mark?
Yeah.
And this was the the office they reserved for only the most senior faculty at SFAI. And of course, that meant that it was Mark, and it was Carlos, and it was the great Bill Bergson. And so I was hanging out down there, like, typing away at whatever, I don't even know what I was doing. I was transcribing the Worlds in Collision book in part. But I say all this because the last time I saw these work, which was one of the last times I also saw Bill Bergson, was at the Mission Cultural Center show. And Bill was wearing, I think, a spectacular peach-colored shirt. He was all about posing in front of the orange tweets. And so somewhere on one of my hard drives, I have this picture of Bill, just super chuffed, very excited about his engagement with this piece that had been folded in that beautiful interview at Carlos's. And so, like, just, I'm not trying to make this about me, but so much as we're trying to set a scene here that bookends this, as these feel like books as well. Because as we start to talk about this work, the thing that Carlos taught me, and that I think is present in this work and with all of us, is this idea of, there's making art, and then there's being an artist, And I think that one can sometimes be like what you do in solitude in your studio, and then the other is how you move through the world, right? The community you engage, the relationships you foster, the ways in which you engage in education. And so Carlos was modeling that for me, and I was trying to kind of muddle my way through learning how that worked. And so I guess when I look at this particular body of work, I see like somehow just the full trajectory of this, where Carlos was doing this really deep Worlds in Collision project, and he was organizing the symposia, which he'd already done 3 of them at the point that I met him, right? Which were, I don't know what they're all the sources of a distinct majority, like the 3, right? And Dewey was obviously there as well, but I was too shy to take a class with you. But so he'd been doing all this incredible collaborative work in and around what was then still called multiculturalism, and I was learning about that. And I think that Carlos, as some of us know in the trajectory of his work, he had started in a more formal minimalist vocabulary, and then he had worked into trying to experiment with what his cultural identity might look like in his work, and the kinds of materials he explored with. And of course, then from there, he goes into like organizing the symposium, because everybody has a right to know more about their identity than, whitewashed art history was letting anybody like investigate yet at the time. So we go from all this into, I think, all the years in which Carlos was just a consummate educator and collaborator. I think living his work in this very, very public way. And I think it's really, really poignant to come to this work towards the very end of his life, where he starts getting very introspective, where he's giving himself permission to go inside again. And there's just a deep quietness to it that I find really moving. Some of you, and Jordan, we had talked about this when we had that first phone call. And when you and I had talked, I had just gotten back from New York and I'd seen the Jack Whitman show, which some of you may have seen, Jack Whitman's work. And I think that while they're distinctly different artists, I think there was a way in which both men were wrestling with this idea of like the intense political, civil rights conversations, identity conversations that they were really deeply, profoundly, personally engaged with, but their desire as artists to still make work that had a different kind of formalism or a different kind of minimalism or an experimentation with materials that didn't necessarily perform those things. So I think that this kind of moment of Carlos giving himself permission, he'd done the work, he'd done the work in so many different ways, and to kind of go from that into this work that was quiet and more portable was just this really, really beautiful thing. And I got more to say about that, but I'm gonna let Mark talk to me.
All right, pose. So I have been a college teacher for 40 years, so of course I got a handout. And the handout is so we get Carlos's
Share with your neighbor.
words in the room.
Share with your neighbor.
And so I've quoted 3 things here, and there's not enough to go around, but I'm going to say thank you again to Jordan for making the copies, but for Jordan for putting this thing together. Oh my God, you know. We're all honored to be here because we're in dialogue with Carlos, and I'm also so honored to be in this dialogue with Great Jennifer Walker. So we've never done a program, I don't think, before. How many people in the room did not know Carlos Villa personally? Yeah, so we're here to kind of introduce his voice to you today. And for those of you who did know Carlos, you know, quick, what did you love most about him?
Everything.
Good.
Generosity.
Generosity is a good word. Humor. You know, who said humor? You know, and how? And how? When I think of Carlos and I want to be happy myself, I think of him like laughing silently. That kind of thing, and I can see it, and it brings me great joy all the way through my body. So I wrote some notes, but I'm going to call on some people here. Let's see. I actually have written it, and so I want to be clear. There. Like I said, I loved his humor and his righteous passion. His vision of the arts as a venue to integrate America, his untiring work ethic. So I'm going to imagine him here, sitting on a stool with us today, listening carefully, encouraging us all with his silent smile, so we can say, "Hi, Carlos. Nice to see you again." I invited 2 people to join me today to participate in the conversation who are not here. And they are Phil Kern and Owen Takabayashi. Owen confirmed that it was Phil Kern who designed and built these heavy crates, which we all kind of assumed anyway because Phil was known for overbuilding. But it was Owen himself who helped Carlos install the innards and rework the exterior and interior of the crates with painting, drawing, and incising. So even though they're not in the room with us, their spirits are here sharing this moment with us as well. And of course, like we all wonder about what's going on with these late crates. I know from reading Carlos's statements, his CV, that he always said his mature work began in 1969 when he returned to San Francisco after spending 6 years in New York, where he was involved with making sculpture that we would call minimalist. Although he did make lifelong friends in New York, we know he spoke disparagingly about the art scene in New York, saying he couldn't relate to people who were talking about what kind of light bulb Dan Flavin was using, or the milieu of one-upsmanship that permeated the artist scene there. He wanted to participate in a completely different kind of art scene, which we were the beneficiaries of. So he came back and he said he drew inspiration from the way Asian and Black kids were wearing their hair at the Telegraph Hill Community Center. And he admired the way Latino kids folded the sleeves of their freshly pressed t-shirts as an example of rasguache. to envision an expanded canon that included non-Western conceptions of art, including ethnographic traditions of ritual and body manipulation, to recuperate from the self-loathing that he felt permeated his background and his own being. He mined that inspiration to build a practice of activism and scholarship that brought him international attention as a central figure of the multicultural movement of the late 20th century, so that people definitely, Lucy Lepard, when she writes, she said, of course, we all knew what Carlos was up to in San Francisco. It made the Art Institute a beacon. But in thinking about Carlos more holistically, it's clear that his work at the turn of the 21st century became increasingly reductive, and he was returning to some of the concerns that had motivated him during those years of minimalist exploration, especially the time in New York. Late in the process of working with Tricia Lagasso and Sherwin Rio, we came across an artist statement that Carlos had written. He would have called it a raison, because he always asked people, he said, write your raison. And it was dated 2006, so the earliest piece is 2003, and most of these were finished 2011, kind of. So right in the window of developing this body of work that explicitly addressed the work we are contemplating today. And I copied the last couple of sentences, and that's the first quote on the handout. Tricia, do you have that handout in your hand?
I don't.
Can you read aloud? Read aloud. The first just two sentences.
All right. Tell me where it is. I haven't been following along.
Yeah. At the very top. Just the
Very top.
Yeah.
My recurring interest in reductive abstraction and minimal sculpture over a period of approximately 40 years. Although my work as an activist has received greater attention, my interest in issues of minimalism has remained at the foundation of my work and my teaching.
And so for me, when I saw that, it's like, what? Explosive feather work? Minimalism is at the center of that? Those paper pulp things that reach 8 feet into the room? This is minimalism at the heart of his whole world of collision, where we're going to get write your own manifesto and go out and work in community. Minimalism. So it made us all think. But that statement clearly draws a through line. Actually, in the statement before that, he says, I am returning to my concerns that I started to explore in New York. In the catalog for the retrospective that we organized, Theo Gonzalez writes about these crates. He likens them to the trunks of possessions that the Mano dragged around during their itinerant lives as migrant workers. But he also quotes our friend Bill Bergson and Bill's sort of poetic remark about the crates and the inscribed lines that he found inside. And it's that blue one right over there called All Tony at the Bon Ton. And Bill writes, quote, recalling those gestural forebears with their house painter brushes, the excavating stroke sweeps from the shoulder, ripping pinstripe lines. Think outside the eponymous hotspot, a moonlit 1950s styled up jacket and pant leg. Across the two well-hinged inner cabinet panels, deeply insouciant blue fields where straight lines meet, an animation occurs, a tiny blip, a bob, and in the disapplied pigment, a pronounced cuneiform-like wedge intones its rugged grace note. A geometric pattern will echo a fabric weave brought to mind as if in a hope chest from northern Luzon. Unquote. I mean, so Bill's spirit's in the house, right? So we can, embrace that with also more love. And we also have to remember to thank Bill for dubbing this body of work a bouquet of crates, to recognize them as unfolding flowers. So these late works have been viewed in continuity with Carlos Villa's earlier meditations on the Mano, But what about making sense of the gap between the New York period and 21st century neo-minimalism and that explosive extravagance of Via's feather and paper pulp period? Our friend Moira Roth wondered about the exact same thing 35 years ago. Thank you, Moira. We're going to call her in. Welcome to the conversation. Moira said to Carlos, "Do you think that there are emotional changes in your work from now back to the work beginning in the mid-1960s?" And Carlos replied, "Yeah, I switch back and forth. You know, tomorrow you'll get a different story. I mean, that's what I like about the work that I do, because I don't necessarily want to illustrate an issue or talk about a specific kind of thing. I try to think all the pieces as a continuation of a dialogue that I have. And I feel that out of that, maybe if I don't give an explanation, maybe somebody can just feel the energy." So it seems Carlos's through line was energy. And that, for me, squares with what we know about Carlos, the passionate, untiring Carlos. And on that little handout, I pulled together a few images of work that I thought had resonance. So I reproduced them. I know they're at tiny scale, but I just wanted to put them into circulation and put them in dialogue with these crates. Some of those are geometric sculptures. The monkeys escape from their inadequate cubic cages. The grid of geometries pop up to escape from their modernist flatness. The coffin-like black box that references a hallway door of the International Hotel that is itself adorned with the image of a revolving door. But I also included a couple of images that reflect energy. Like my favorite of all time of his installations, Force Field, featuring feathered figures running a gauntlet of plywood kris and daggers under a blustery soundtrack of wind gales that he presented at Mills College and in New York. And a 1960s drawing of concentric circles that look like ripples in a pond or maybe sound waves that really resonate, I think, with the musical staves, as Dewey Crumpler called them, evoking jazz that we see in this late body of work. Finally, I want to share two more quotations from Carlos from a long interview with Paul Karlstrom that Jordan mentioned, which was done 30 years ago, in which Carlos spoke specifically about his interest in art as installation. And he said, formally, in terms of assembling certain kinds of things, I mean, like we can go all the way back to Kurt Schmitter's, like going through garbage cans and retrieving all that has been lost and thrown away in life to be able to make it incredible. I mean, to this day, I think the two best shows I ever saw in my entire life, in terms of architecture, in terms of concept, in terms of everything, was Bruce Conner's show at Batman Gallery in 1959, but the other was Alexander Calder's retrospective at the Guggenheim, because, it was all about the planes and that, about viewing the planes in the Guggenheim and in the work of pieces hanging from the ceiling. So now we can imagine that Carlos loved the potential of these angling doors and installing them so that they open differently to create an installation of planes that created its own energy. And finally, the last quotation that I distributed from Carlos related to his first ever exhibition in the summer of 1958. And he said, I did a sculpture that I made from an old water heater box and some wood that I had wrapped in some red and white and blue bunting, and I put hide skin glue over the whole thing to kind of glue it together. But then there was that stench of hide skin glue, and I had to put it up near the fountain. And immediately Bruce Conner came up and said, I want to show this in my Rat Bastard show. And it became a piece that headed a poet's parade from the bagel shop down to Russell Long Hall, where Philip Lamantia had shredded this Eastern poet with 2 words, and then they were using my coffin to lead the whole procession down. I mean, it was taken down to Spazza Gallery. That coffin was the first time I was shown. So I see these crates as a final resonance with Carlos Villa's first ever box, the recycled water heater box that was dubbed worthy of the Rat Bastard Protective Association by Bruce Conner himself, the first work Carlos ever exhibited, completing a long arc, a full circle, back to his initial Beat Generation inspiration. And before we leave, I'm just going to talk about a piece in the other room. I was especially happy when I came to see this show, to see the double-doored yellow grid piece that I believe is being exhibited for the very first time in this show. I didn't even know it existed. It resonates with so much. Yes, it resonates with the minimal work from the 60s and the early 21st century, but it also resonates with the symmetry of those feathered cloaks. It's got 2 arms like this, and it resonates with the triptychs from Carlos Villa's youth as an altar boy. I love its sunny palette and whack-a-mole, planar, pop-up syncopation that still projects some of Carlos Villa's fun-loving disposition. And these are my thoughts